On December 17th, an oil pipeline was blown up in Moscow. Holy shit. Oh no. Moscow and Saint Petersburg are under attack from Ukrainian drones and missiles. Just an oil depot. No fucking way. It blew up. There they are. Refineries have been blown up and Muscovites are in a panic. Shit, something blew up hard over there. Damn, it's fucked over there. Oh my god. Muscovites are crying? A year. Go help. I'm crying. My credit is about to blow up. What do I do? Oh my god. And they're running. It's flying. Fuck, it's flying, damn it. Fuck. And the drones just keep coming, flying and flying. Ooh. Oh no. A series of drone attacks. The Druzhba oil pipeline is on fire, the largest artery in Europe, pumping millions of tons of oil. Our bitumen plant is burning. Oil refineries are burning in Bryansk, Volgograd, and Krasnodar Krai. The helium plant in Orenburg has been destroyed. It's fucked, look. Just 3 drones went in there, can you imagine? And still, 1 hit dead on? What do you mean it's fucked? The plant is fucked, totally fucked. If it goes off now, it's going to blow up. Crimea is without the Scala M radar. Tatarstan is without Shahed drone depots. Rail and air transport collapse. Oh fuck. They hit the oil refinery. They hit it, fuck. This is fucked. The plant is on fire. Sensational news. Moscow and Saint Petersburg are under attack. Crimea has lost an important radar. He says that's it. Tatarstan is without a storage for Iranian drones. Russia is stopping gasoline exports. Up to 15% of oil refining has been destroyed. Strikes all over Russia. The infrastructure is paralyzed. And the racists, Muscovites, and people from St. Petersburg are just out of their minds. Completely out of it. It's just a total shit show over there. Over there, it's just... I just woke up because of a sudden loud bang. We all jumped up. I said, what's going on? Dima says, Arena, they're bombing. We just opened the balcony and look, and it's right next to the building. The building is shaking. There's a refinery right next to the building, an oil refinery. Oh my god, it's so terrifying. Drones are turning the Druzhba oil pumping station in Bryansk into a blazing inferno. Oil refineries are burning in the Moscow region, Volgograd, Krasnodar Krai, Slavyansk, and Kuban. There are powerful explosions in Crimea, with more than 100 drones attacking the occupied peninsula. Guys, it's a drone attack. We were just sitting here chatting away. And basically, it flew by. It flew right between us. Quick, to the stairs. Shit, faster. Another one, the second one again. They're jamming the signal. Mobile internet is down. A powerful Russian radar has been destroyed there. Scala M is on fire. That's it. Ah, siren! That's it, let's go. We're leaving. Tatarstan is on fire. The Shahed stored there have been destroyed. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Right now. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Marina Grigorievna, indeed, we are now starting to strike very intensively. We have destroyed or damaged as much as possible the helium plant in Orenburg. This is the only facility in Russia that produces a critical component for missiles. How much could this impact the Russian missile program and defense industry?
It will definitely reduce production, although they do have a sufficient number of laboratories where helium can be produced, including on an industrial scale. So now they can switch over if there is a certain critical shortage, specifically of helium. But there's another aspect here. This plant processed 15 billion cubic meters of gas per year. That's the main point. So the attempt to shut down the gas processing plant, if it succeeds, and I think it will, if not the first time, then the second will make it possible to expect that the Russians will at the very least have to shut down their wells. Their gas wells, they simply won't have anywhere to put the gas. What does that mean? 15 billion cubic meters. Ukraine consumes 15 billion cubic meters for its own needs. That's as of now. We used to go up to 20 when everything was running at full capacity. Right now, we consume about 15 billion cubic meters. So that's the consumption of an entire country by a single plant. If you strike it, then at the very least, first of all, they don't receive a certain amount of oil, gas, and so-called dollars. Foreign currency from oil is the economy. It's a blow to the economy. Secondly, they have nowhere to put the gas, so they'll have to shut down the wells. A shut-in well can stay that way for several years, and then it will have to be reopened, or else the gas will have to be flared. That is, if you flare it for a long time, the flare itself later on can cause destruction. So it's a double or even triple blow, I would say, all at once. It's a blow to the Russian economy, the military sector, and technological aspects, especially regarding the transfer and involvement of certain services in the management of this gas. So it's the right approach. This is how intelligence works. I always say, when intelligence selects its own targets so that no one else interferes, they pick out such key points that, if destroyed, either halt the entire technological production cycle or deliver several blows in different directions at once, just like with this helium plant. And where exactly? All the way near Kazakhstan, and that's not far from Oktyabr by those standards. At least they made it there.
Roman Igorovich, the attack on the Druzhba oil pumping station, the largest oil pipeline hub near Bryansk, is on fire. And can we say, as you always do, that this is the beginning of a systemic collapse of Russia's oil infrastructure? We're really trying to strike hard.
We can already say that because over the past 2 weeks, there have been systematic strikes on oil pumping, on Russian oil refining, and on the oil and gas sector. The reason I emphasized it is that while it seems like a strike on the helium plant, in reality, it's a strike on gas processing. 15 billion cubic meters. Plus the latest strikes, if we list them, for example, the Novokuybishevsk, Ryazan, Afipsky, and Saratov oil refineries. Ukhta refinery, and there were strikes on Wednesday, there were strikes on the Novoshakhtinsk and Volgograd oil refineries. So this is already definitely systematic, plus the strike on Unecha. Remember Unecha, how many years have we been talking about it? Well, Unecha is just 40 kilometers away now. LPDS, Unecha on the Druzhba oil pipeline. This is the Druzhba pipeline, yes, in the Bryansk region. Moreover, the oil pumped by Tatarstan, mostly the oil in the Druzhba pipeline is Tatar oil. Every day, 300,000 barrels of oil pass through Unecha. That's $18 million every day. The Russian economy receives this from selling that oil. After Unecha, the oil continues on. There it passes through Mamai. Mamai is nearby, which is also another pumping station. Then the oil splits off, meaning the pipeline branches toward Usluga. Near Saint Petersburg, Russian tankers are loaded, the so-called shadow fleet, the tanker fleet. Part of the pipeline goes to Belarus, branching off again to the Naftan refinery, the Belarusian oil refinery, and to the Mozyr refinery. From Mozyr, the pipeline branches again, heading toward Poland and Germany. All of this is oil, all of it passes through Unecha, which was hit today. And part of the pipeline, now carrying refined oil as diesel, consists of 2 pipes. A product pipeline for diesel and the Druzhba oil pipeline go through Ukraine. We pump them to Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czechs. But the Czechs have already refused Russian oil. They couldn't manage it, and they put Italian oil into the pipeline. So is there a move away from Russian oil? Nevertheless, a strike, if they hit Unecha, it would stop this whole cluster, practically. If they managed to take out Unecha, last time they struck it, but it was unsuccessful, as I understand it, because there was no confirmation of a fire. But the technological cycle of oil chemical analysis was stopped. Today's strike, or rather yesterday's, you could say, this strike has already caused some real damage, but not far away, just 40 kilometers. So basically, if they've started, believe me, it will burn. Unecha will burn, but to completely stop the oil flow, you need to destroy 3 in a row. Oil pumping stations. So you need to work on Mamai, starting with the Steel Horse. If you remember, we talked about this 6 months ago, the Steel Horse that's over there in the Zabryansk area. Steel Horse, Desna, Unecha, and around Mamai. All of that needs to be taken out, and then you can completely stop the oil flow through the Druzhba pipeline. I think that's exactly what will happen. So we have the opportunity, as long as our hands aren't tied by various mechanisms like they were at the beginning of the year. When we started, by the way, with that same Unecha. There were good strikes on Unecha, the Steel Horse, and Desna, somewhere around February or March. But then in March, we were stopped.
Roman Igorovich, regarding what we've analyzed, the strikes on the oil refineries in Volgograd, in Krasnodar Krai, in Slavyansk, in Kuban, and the simultaneous attacks across all these regions. Roman Igorovich, what does this indicate, and to what extent are we really able to carry out such attacks? The fuel market and military supplies in Russia. So how will these strikes specifically affect the fuel market and military supplies in Russia?
I've already listed them. All 7 of the Russian oil refineries are million-tonners. The Russians have about 30 of these million-ton refineries. Well, maybe a little more than 30, that's all. Not many. There are another 50 small ones, but those are minor. Frankly speaking, they're more like moonshine stills. And the real million-ton refineries, there are about 30 to 35 of them. So you could say we've already hit 7 of them. That's a quarter, maybe a fifth, a quarter, depending on which ones are operating and their production volume. We could stop, completely shut down all Russian oil refining. And if oil refining stops, oil production will stop as well. Halting oil production will lead to shutting down oil wells. There are thousands of them, but still, with nowhere to send the oil, they'll have to shut them down. Reopening a shut-in well is a gamble. Sometimes you need to let everything settle down there because there are certain factors related to water injection, but those are technological cycles. That's why strikes on oil refineries are very important for us. So shutting down the refineries first will hit the Russian economy and lead to the beginning of Russia's collapse. That's the only way to defeat Russia. And naturally, the fuel that was supposed to go to the Russian army simply won't get there. It won't be produced. Strikes on plants that produce aviation kerosene are especially important. By the way, the first 2 plants, Novokuybishevsky and Ryazansky, produce aviation kerosene. Or rather, they used to produce aviation kerosene, and hitting them was the right move. The targets were chosen correctly. The main thing now is not to stop, so that in the near future, all those people trying to tie the hands of our armed forces in dismantling the Russian Empire don't force us to stop striking the oil refineries. Forcing us into some kind of air ceasefire or something else like that. If we keep up this kind of work for 6 months, just look, in 2 weeks, we've hit all the refineries. By the end of the year, the Russians won't have a single one left, and we'll get to the Omsk refinery too. If we've already reached the Orenburg refinery near Kazakhstan, then believe me, we have a lot of acquaintances in Kazakhstan who will at least help us get to Omsk as well. Omsk is the largest. They process 21 million tons per year.
Roman Igorovich, the Russian government has banned the export of petroleum products because of Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries.
That's right. Again, it's a double blow. First, what did the ban on gasoline exports lead to? To a decrease in foreign currency earnings for the Russian economy. A blow, definitely a blow. It seemed like it was just 2 plants that got hit at first, Novokuybishevsky and Ryazansky, and they immediately made the decision because Novokuybishevsky processes 7 million tons per year and Ryazansky processes about 15 to 17 million tons. So basically that's like one Omsk refinery, like one big Russian plant. Naturally, this shortage was immediately felt. And especially, why is the shortage being felt? Because the Russian movement began. An army on the move consumes a huge amount of fuel. Naturally, there isn't enough. Either the army won't have enough, or the harvest is still underway. So either for the harvest or for personal use by the civilian population. Naturally, it was necessary to make the decision to restrict gasoline exports, and immediately gasoline prices started to rise, at least on the markets, on the major markets, on the wholesale markets. And this is already an indicator that there is a real gasoline shortage, and it will definitely continue in the future. Moreover, it is precisely the gasoline shortage that could lead to serious stagnation of the Russian economy through inflation. Because in Russian goods, 50, sometimes even 70% of the price is actually the cost of delivery. In other words, it's the price of gasoline itself. Naturally, if gasoline starts getting more expensive, then products will start getting more expensive too. Consumption in Russia, Russia by Russians, and Russians live by their TV and their refrigerator. And then this herd, if I open the refrigerator and see nothing but a fig with poppy seeds, well, maybe just lick the poppy seeds, obviously, and just look at the fig. Then they'll start mooing, and not just mooing, they'll start looking for horns somewhere, ready to butt heads. This is a big problem for Putin. In fact, that's what he fears most, when this Russian mooing, bleating herd. They'll start looking for something to eat, because their salary just isn't enough to fill the fridge, and you can't really feed yourself from the TV. The TV can only feed your brain, but it has nothing to do with your stomach.
Not today. Last night, more than 100 drones attacked the occupied Crimea, with reports that the Scala M radar was destroyed. In Crimea, this means the loss of the ability to control up to 3,150 kilometers of airspace. And what does this now mean for the defense of occupied Crimea and the use of Russian aviation, Roman Grigorievich?
Well, there's not just one radar there. These are the enemy's radio technical troops radars. About 3 to 5 of them are destroyed every week, that's for sure. So on one hand, there is a systematic clearing of Crimea going on, and on the other hand, a rather interesting action is being carried out. After we destroy the radars, the Russians take radars from their anti-aircraft missile systems, say from some oil refinery, and transfer them to Crimea. Crimea is their priority. Naturally, this means you don't have to run all over Russia, destroying every air defense system. You can just focus on Crimea. They'll bring everything there themselves, just like in Chornobyivka. So it's like a big Chornobyivka. How many times was it? 30 times they struck the Russians and their troops with new attacks in Chornobyivka, those strikes. So it's the same situation here. And here in Crimea, you can focus on destroying the entire enemy through Crimea. They'll bring everything there themselves, leave their rear exposed, and they won't try to close off the Kerch Bridge from Crimea. Today's strike on Crimea, which we're talking about now, is exactly one of those, and it was a large-scale one. After all, it wasn't just the radar that was hit. The strikes were mainly carried out on Feodosia, on the Kerch Bridge, and in the area around the Kerch Bridge, and on the Port Kavkaz, which are near the Kerch Bridge, and which are used, first of all, to pump fuel into Crimea. There are pumps installed there. Naturally, there are also railroad ferries that are already entering Crimea. They are on the Caucasus side, loaded with rail cars there, and then unloaded further along the way in the Kerch area. So this is a massive strike on Crimea. I think within a day, the General Staff will confirm it after decoding the data. Active monitoring systems or sensors will at least show where the strikes were delivered. But the strike was serious. That is, the strike hit Feodosia, some military facilities, and the port of Kavkaz.
Roman Nikolaevich, today I watched some material related to occupied Crimea, and it reported that the Gauleiters, the occupiers, the occupation authorities, made a statement that now, on the territory of occupied Crimea, there will be no mobile connection or internet at all for a very long time. This was done so that they could fight against the drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. So now they've shut down communication and mobile internet on the occupied peninsula. What does this indicate?
They're afraid right now at this moment. Why are they doing this? Well, from a military logic standpoint, that's how it is. Why? Because there is a certain protocol for protecting high-risk facilities, so-called, like the Kerch Bridge, for example. In order to fully secure, let's say, from reconnaissance to targeting, all communications are shut down. Naturally, the highest security protocol for the Kerch Bridge is now in effect, and they're going to shut everything down. Everyone there will be marching in formation on the parade ground for these few days until Friday. And even after Friday, most likely until Monday, because they won't be able to go on a bender starting Friday like Russians usually do. So I think they'll keep the Crimean Bridge under this maximum security regime, at least until Monday. We'll see. That's the question here. We don't always use Russian communications either. There are other mechanisms there.
Tamarin Gorky, the second RSBU, was destroyed by another Shahed in Tatarstan. We did it again just a few days ago. A repeated strike on a target 1,300 kilometers from Ukraine. At this point, how does this demonstrate the capabilities of long-range drones and their strategic effect?
By the way, judging by the video, these are already new drones. These are already drones like the Iranian Russian or the Iranian Shahed or the Chinese Sunflower 200. In other words, it's a wing-type drone. This means we've already set up serial production, and at least at our own base, the same SBU guys have established the production of pretty decent drones, all things considered. The thing is, it's specifically the wing configuration that allows, if there's enough fuel and a good engine, to send this drone several thousand kilometers. It all depends on the reliability of the engine and the amount of fuel. So they've gone into this area correctly. They've taken the right approach, because fixed wing type drones are, of course, better used at short ranges. Well, at least that's how we use the bobbers, right? Or the same goes for the Liuchian 196. I mean, fixed wing types are actually quite easy to shoot down. Their speed is lower, but a winged drone can be accelerated to pretty high speeds. Eventually, you could even install not just an internal combustion engine there, but also put in a turbine without significantly changing the configuration of the aircraft itself. So this is thinking ahead. They started thinking about it. And honestly, if the SBU is working on this, believe me, they're doing a great job in this regard. Well, first of all, regarding target designation and carrying out combat missions, they've made significant progress in terms of producing this type of drone. And as for the fact that the Geran drones are now Russian-Chinese, and because they're Russian-Chinese, they can produce a lot of them. So what is a Geran? Right now, a Geran is a body cast in Russia. The body is Russian, the engine. The Chinese have already set up a factory in Russia. The internal combustion engine, though, is still produced in Russia for now. The turbines are still made by the Chinese. That's for the Geran 3. Most of the components and assemblies, especially the servos and some control systems, are Chinese. Over 50% of it is Chinese, and the main board is produced at the Veneer Progress Control Facility. So these are the Garans, and now they've started producing a lot of them, about 150 to 200 per day. They use up to 100 against us, which means they're storing about 100 for themselves. So these warehouses have already been identified by security, and drones were sent there. The extent of the damage is still unclear, but it will become known. I think confirmation will come in some time, but we have to keep working. Even at a distance of 1,500 kilometers, such drones can reach their targets. The main thing is to scale up production and keep hitting them constantly. Believe me, this issue can be solved. We can reduce the number of Garans in their warehouses, and eventually we'll get to their production sites as well, because we need to take out the production facilities, and not just in Russia, because without destroying the production in China, we won't reach a certain level. In the end, even if we destroy all the production in Russia, they'll just move it to China and start bringing in Chinese drones.
Roman Egorovich, here's some fresh information to confirm your words. Bloomberg reports that the Saratov oil refinery has stopped receiving oil after the latest drone attack. This could affect gasoline supplies. The situation is dire. It belongs to Rosneft. Roman Egorovich, please comment.
This Saratov plant on the banks of the Volga used to take in 7 million tons of oil. So the Volga divides it between Saratov and Elber. On one side from the west is Saratov from the left bank and not from the east. And this plant was right on the bank of the Volga. Naturally, it was only a matter of time before we reached it once the order was given. When they allowed us to strike, the question is why it was forbidden in the first place. That's another matter, according to Article 111 of the Criminal Code. And after we started striking, naturally Saratov, the Saratov oil refinery, was immediately hit as well. And it's not going anywhere. It's been there for 90 years. That plant is 90 years old. I think it's called a cracking plant, that facility. If my memory serves me right, it was only a matter of time before it would be hit, and it was hit. They accomplished their mission. The task was carried out by unmanned systems. I think it was done by the SBS guys, ours, and they have them too. By the way, the AN-196 is exactly one of those fierce Antonov drones that delivered the strike. It came to a complete stop. So you could say that at least 7 million tons, Russians are now going to be wondering what to do with it, and most likely, since they can no longer send extra oil to foreign markets, they'll start shutting down their production infrastructure. And there will be a shortage of gasoline. This plant was mainly producing gasoline and diesel. And naturally, this gasoline and diesel doesn't reach either the domestic market or the foreign market because it's shut down, nor does it go to the Russian army. Granted, it didn't supply Moscow that much, but in order to disrupt, say, fuel supplies to Moscow and the Moscow region, you'd have to take out 2 more plants. Take out the plant that supplies there. Mainly, it's the Kapotnya oil refinery. It supplies almost half of the gasoline and diesel for Moscow and the Moscow region. And if we really go all the way and take out the entire Druzhba oil pipeline, shut it down, then the Mosir refinery, Belarus, the Mosir refinery, used to supply the other half of the fuel to Moscow. Besides the fact that they won't be able to fly out, now they won't even be able to leave by land. So just imagine, velvet season, and they're stuck sitting somewhere in Moscow's basements.
Roman Egorovich, a very important topic is the enemy's offensive, the enemy's advance near Dobropolye, and the threat of encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Let's start with Dobropolye, a breakthrough of 15 to 18 kilometers, the capture of Kucheryov Yar and Zolotoy Kolodets. At this point, is this a local tactical operation or the beginning of a major enemy offensive?
The thing is, when carrying out the tasks of the first wave, these are shaping operations, so-called reconnaissance by combat, attempts to break through the front lines, after which the second wave moves in. The second wave, which is now starting to arrive, we can already see it, equipment, ammunition, personnel, all fresh, so to speak, they can enter the breakthrough if it happens and then move out into the operational space. And there, as they say, it's a free-for-all, go wherever you want as far as you can until you run out of fuel. But right now, that breakthrough hasn't happened because everyone keeps talking about a breakthrough, but no, there is no operational breakthrough. There is operational seepage through our positions, but why is it called operational seepage? It happened because we don't have enough troop density along the line of contact, especially on the main section from Pokrovsk to Konstantinovka. Well, everyone understands perfectly well that it's not enough. Roughly speaking, there should be 3 platoons per kilometer, meaning a company should cover a kilometer. Sometimes we have a company covering several kilometers, and there's just 1 platoon strong point for several kilometers. Naturally, between these platoon strongpoints, the Russians can slip through in sufficient numbers to then regroup somewhere in the rear and cause trouble at a distance. 10 to 15 kilometers, so that's how they broke through, but it's not a real breakthrough. No one saw them, they slipped through. They slipped through and then started causing chaos in the rear, as they say. Deep State drew a map showing a breakthrough as such. There was no breakthrough, and at the moment, a decision has been made to send reserves there to plug the gaps. In that direction, we've been talking about this for 3 months. A decision needs to be made. Syrskyi needed to make a decision not to run around in the Sumy, Kursk, Kharkiv, and Belgorod regions and focus on the Eastern Front. Why? Because the main objective for the Russians is to capture Donetsk region. Naturally, they will put pressure on Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, because without Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, they can't get to Dobropilya. And without Dobropilya, they will eventually come from the west, already towards Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, and Druzhkivka. In other words, this operation is obvious, it's right there on the map. And our third line of defense was holding the Russians back quite well until Syrskyi started reducing the troop density. Why he started reducing it, let them figure that out themselves. Did the politicians tell him to do it? Did he come up with it himself, decide to play around with the front line, or just stupidly surrender? Donbas, I don't know why. But judging by the inaction, I'll say it again, if we hadn't been talking about this for 3 months, maybe it wouldn't even be worth mentioning now. But for 3 months, we talked about this in almost every broadcast. In order to hold the Eastern Front, you need to increase troop density and bring in the security forces. Well, every stream, that's what we talk about. So what happened? In the end, they brought in the security forces, sent the National Guard, the First Corps, the National Guard units there. So that's exactly what happened. Security forces, the National Guard is part of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So the Ministry of Internal Affairs needs to act. There are 1,300 of them, and we have 1,100. We need the armed forces of Ukraine. And that's it. There won't be any more questions. There won't be these breakthroughs. Well, it's not really a breakthrough. I'll say it again. It's infiltration. It's infiltration that went unnoticed. Our outcries simply went unnoticed. And then when they already appeared in the rear, now they've started to deal with these issues. It's pretty much the same situation, Remember Aladdin's slippers, as they used to say, when they didn't notice the Ukrainian troops that got into their rear last year in Kursk. This was exactly the same kind of tactical infiltration, meaning there were too few of Aladdin's slippers along the borderline. Our troops slipped through between them, and then it was just a matter of crushing them from the rear. They were crushed, and the breakthrough happened. That's how you prevent such a breakthrough from happening. It's better not to allow it in the first place. Immediately increase the troop density along the Donetsk front. The Russians won't launch offensives anywhere else, at least not on a large scale. Nowhere except the Donetsk and part of the Zaporizhia front. Why do they need to expand the land corridor? Why is Putin now demanding that we withdraw from the Donetsk direction ourselves?
Roman Nikolaevich, you just made a very strong point, but I would like you to articulate it specifically, separately, for our audience for whom this is very important, about the threat of encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. So what is the danger for the armed forces of Ukraine in this sector?
If we allow the encirclement of Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, meaning they push us out of this direction, then they will have what is called operational space opening up for them. Practically all the way to Pavlohrad, which is already in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and in reality there is operational space all the way to the Dnipro. That's why, for example, when the Poles say to the Dnipro, they mean to the Dnipro River, because they could advance not only toward Pavlohrad and Dnipro, but also toward Kremenchuk, toward Poltava, that is from the left bank, wherever they want. It's practically all flatland there. That is the third ridge, the last ridge, the so-called Donetsk ridge. This is the third line of defense, which our forces are currently holding in the area of Pokrovsk. From Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka, if you let them through, then only the Dnipro will stop them. I mean the Dnipro River. Do you know why the Poles are now building a defense system? And do you know where? On the Vistula. Not along the border with, say, Belarus or even the Kaliningrad region, because it's also flat terrain there. And the first real obstacle is the Vistula. That's why on the western bank of the Vistula, they're building a certain system there. And they're doing the right thing, by the way. That's exactly it. That's what I mean by the right action. So we can't allow the Russians to break through the third line of defense. Otherwise, we'll have to chase them on the right bank of the Dnipro. They're already milling around on the left bank near Kherson. So this is a very dangerous situation at the moment. And why have we been talking about it for 3 months? We're not just talking about it for no reason. Stop running around Sumy and Kursk. Russians aren't going to attack Sumy and Kyiv from the Kursk direction. Don't believe those crazy deputies who've worn their hands to the bone digging Kyiv's defense system. There's no need to dig in around Kyiv. They won't make it to Kiev. Pull those deputies back and let the Verkhovna Rada pass better laws instead. Otherwise, in their foolishness, they'll end up digging all the way to the center of the earth. They've already started digging around Kiev. And these are our military comrades after all. Well, not exactly military, I mean, so there's no need to run around anywhere. All of this is just noise grenades, so-called diversionary maneuvers. That goes for Kharkiv, by the way, and for Kherson too. It's the same kind of conflict. But the real pressure from the Russians will be focused on breaking through the third line of defense to capture the Donetsk front lines. And that's where they'll be concentrating. That's what Syrskyi needs to be told, though I don't know. Again, what does it mean to explain it to him? Do you think he doesn't understand? He's just as much a military man as I am. He understands this perfectly well. Any lieutenant would understand this. Anyone who's seen a topographic map just looked at the elevation map and saw the deployment of forces and assets on both sides and immediately understands where one side will go and what the other side needs to do. And if Syrskyi understands this and doesn't act, then it means he's not doing it for some reason of his own or because of political orders he receives from the office. So let them figure it out themselves. But Donbass, we won't let you surrender it, comrades from the Green Party.
Please like this. Write a few words for Ukraine, for Ukraine's armed forces. Roman Hryhorovich and I are working for you, for the audience all over the world, so that you know the truth about Russian aggression and Russia's war against Ukraine. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Hryhorovich, thank you, and as always, see you this Friday.
Goodbye.